still aim to inspire greater church action on the climate crisis. So we try and provide sort of focus and inspiration and action in response to sort of the growing threat that we all face. So, as I said, we work with all Christian denominations, and we also support interfaith work as well on climate change. And we were set up originally by Green Christian and churches together in Britain and Ireland in 2004. So we've been going for a little while. Let's see if I can move my screen down. There we go. There's a photo of a few of us at the Restore Nature Now March a few months back. We're quite a small organisation. There's only 4 sort of staff members, but we have a bunch of really engaged trustees as well, and 2,000 plus amazing supporters. Some of you may be on our list as one of those. And we have a number of campaigns. The one that we're probably most known for is our church divestment campaign, which was running for about a decade, during which we really focused on churches moving their money out of fossil fuels. And we've basically drawn that to a close because almost all church denominations in the UK have now divested from fossil fuels, which is brilliant. So while it's still individual churches, so kind of at a congregational level, might still have investments that include fossil fuels, as umbrella churches and denominations now don't. So we've been moving on to focusing on more on how churches can use their assets, both their money and their land, to help tackle climate change and protect biodiversity. So we have a stream of work around encouraging more church investments into climate solutions, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. And also thinking about church land and the climate crisis and how we can use the land that we've been blessed with to be part of the solution. Now, I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time to talk about why it's important for Christians to act. And I think that everybody on this call wouldn't be on this call if you didn't think it was important to take action. But I just think as we get started, it's sometimes worth just recapping why it's so important that we do something, because often I come across quite weary churches that have lots of competing priorities, and it's quite hard to make climate change a top priority. And so it's just worth pausing and thinking about why that's so important. And I think that we know, don't we, that climate change threatens God's precious creation, and it's an existential threat as well to our global neighbours around the world. And I think that if we're called to do those two things of stewarding the earth and loving our neighbour, then we have no choice but to take urgent action in response to the climate crisis. And I'm always inspired by this quote that some of you may have come across by Saint Teresa of Avila, which says, "Christ has no body now but yours, no hands, no feet on earth but yours. Yours are the eyes with which he looks compassion on this world." And I feel like responding to climate change is one way in which we can be Christ-like. We can love each other and love God's world through the actions that we take. And finally, collectively, we have great power and wealth as churches and responsibility that comes along with that. I think as individuals, sometimes we might feel that we don't have much power, but collectively as Christians, we really do. And our money has huge influence as well. And we're called, aren't we, to live differently and to not be driven by consumerism, not be driven by accumulation and fear of losing it all. But we're driven by a vision of God's justice, of God's economics, of God's generosity, which is absolutely upside down, topsy-turvy, turns the world's view of things on its head. And by trusting in his goodness and his provision, I think we can be freed up to live more kind of open-handedly and to live differently. And I think we have the responsibility to use the money that God entrusts to us wisely and ethically. And it can make a real difference. Imagine if the church became this beacon of a practical demonstration of building a cleaner and safer future through the radical, sustainable use of all our resources, not looking like any other normal organisation that might sort of worry about losing percentage points on investments here and there, but actually a Jesus and justice shaped organisation that does things differently and really drives a safer future. So that's the dream, but what can we practically do to get there? Well, I wanted to just talk about Operation Noah's campaigns, and then also talk a little bit about some political campaigns that we can all talk to our MPs about, particularly if we're going to be involved in the climate lobby in a couple of weeks' time. But first of all, one of our campaigns is called the Big Bank Switch. So we are working alongside other Christian charities like the Just Money Movement and Just Love, which is a sort of student charity as well, and the Laudato Si movement in the Catholic Church to push this campaign to get Christians to move into greener banking. And we've got some information here that in 2023 alone, the big five UK high street banks provided $55 billion to fossil fuel companies, which of course drives climate change. And just Barclays and HSBC alone have invested over $427 billion in fossil fuels since the Paris Climate Agreement was signed 10 years ago. And they're two of the worst banks in Europe for financing the climate crisis. But how many Christians have accounts with them? I'd wager millions. So switching to a greener and more ethical bank is a really important way that we can live out our faith, but also send a strong message to our banks and to the wider financial sector as more and more people switch, that things need to change, that we're not happy with this status quo. And it's pretty easy as individuals to switch banks as well. We have a blog on our website at the moment from one of our trustees who kind of talks you through his process of doing it. And he just was very surprised that it was one conversation and an online form and it was done, and all his standing orders and direct debits moved over with it. So it's worth thinking about. And not only us as individuals, but our churches can switch bank accounts as well. And I really commend to you this Greener, Fairer Banking Guide from our friends at the Just Money Movement, which compare different banks that are greener options for your church. They compare CAF Bank, Co-op Bank, Unity Trust and Reliance Bank, and give you really detailed information about what you might consider when thinking about switching to one of those. But there are others as well, and Which Guide identifies 3 providers for current accounts that have no exposure to fossil fuels in their banking activities as well. So that includes Triodos and Nationwide. So there are options out there for individual churches to make sure that they're not putting money into the climate crisis. And that's a really important way that our churches can take action. And then thirdly is thinking about wider church funds. Now, this can be at an individual church level or at a denominational level or a regional level in between, because we know that churches hold quite a lot of money. We've got this figure here that Christian aligned assets, so that's the money in church bank accounts and investments, are over $260 billion. And that was from some University of Oxford research in 2022. And notably, that is across 26 countries that were surveyed. And the US churches came out by far the richest, as you might imagine. But the UK is 5th on that list. Due to the historical wealth of our church institutions and our religious orders and denominations, we collectively hold an awful lot of wealth that can be used for good. And we know, don't we, that we need to urgently transition into a low carbon economy. And we need investment to do that. We need investment into the technological solutions that already exist that will help to drive a greener future. And so we're calling on the church to take a lead in this. Just as many denominations have already chosen to divest from fossil fuels over the last decade, now we feel that the church can act prophetically and show moral leadership and take positive action to invest into climate solutions and to speak out about it and influence others to do the same. And we're not talking small fry here, because just the Church of England alone has an estimated endowment of 13.6 billion. So that's just one of the denominations in the UK, albeit a large one. A lot of our church denominations also have significant funds that can be used for this prophetic use. And which is why last year we teamed up with our friends at Faith Invest and the Just Money Movement to launch this Green Investment Declaration for churches. And it's a new initiative that's designed as a tool to help churches and faith institutions to take practical steps to make sure that their investments line up with their faith values and use them to tackle climate change. And a number of religious orders and churches and regional groups and denominations have already signed up or are in the process of doing so. This is a declaration on the website of the Diocese of Truro, who was a recent signatory last year to the declaration. I think they were our first one, in fact. And then the Quakers in Britain recently signed up last month. And I know that the Methodist Church as well have agreed to take this forward. So it's a growing movement of churches of all stripes looking to put their money into making a difference. There are three levels of the declaration, which are intentionally, the acorn level is intentionally quite low bar to say you don't need to have a huge amount of money, you don't need to have started on this journey yet. You just need to have the intention and the commitment to start investing in solutions that will tackle the climate crisis. So that's the acorn level, and then you sort of move up through it, recognising it's a journey over the long term up to oak level, where you'll have already invested at least 5% of your assets into climate solutions. So that's the Green Investment Declaration. I'd really encourage you to take a look at this. We have a wealth of materials on our website to help individuals within churches to write letters to the powers that be, their finance committees and boards, to ask them to consider signing up to this. We have template motions for synods or assemblies. And if there's anything else that you think would be helpful for you in sort of advocating for this within your church, then do let us know, and we'd love to help see this movement grow. And this is just a picture of the declaration text of what you'll be signing up to. And then finally, our third campaign area is around the good stewardship of church land. And that's because churches are some of the largest landowners in the country, but we know that a lot of church land is causing environmental degradation. Often it's used as agricultural land, and there's excessive pesticide runoff that causes river pollution. Degraded peatlands are emitting carbon dioxide when they could be a carbon sink in this country. And a lot of churches that own land, and whether that be pockets of glebe land or whatever it might be, often don't have sort of full maps of where that is and what the land's being used for. So we're calling on churches to ensure that their land is part of the solution to climate change as well, and not part of the problem. So, for example, growing more trees, making sure that any farming is sustainable, and restoring peatland. And we have this church land use vision that lays out 7 areas, including sort of being transparent about what churches own, mapping what they own, making sure they're reducing emissions. And we handed in an open letter on this campaign on World Environment Day earlier this month to 9 church denominations. There are some photos of us meeting with various friends across churches here. And that was, World Environment Day. And that was an opportunity to hand in a request for churches to do these 7 actions, but also a photo book, which was compiled by dozens and dozens and dozens of projects around the country of all different church denominations, sharing what individuals are doing at a local level. That's really inspiring and pushing their wider churches to do more as well. So we handed that photo book with those examples to all of those 9 church denominations as well, pushing them to do more. But if you do have any stories locally, I heard a number of you saying that you're in the sort of local eco groups and local eco churches together networks. But if there are examples of stories that you're involved with, or that you're inspired by, that use land or produce food in ways that benefit the environment, we'd love to hear from you, and do let me know, because we'd love to sort of share your stories as well and amplify those to people in decision-making positions in churches. Which brings me on to political action as well. And I'm not going to talk a huge amount about the mass lobby of Parliament on the 9th of July, because I think that Alex will talk a bit more about that in a moment. But that's one opportunity to get together with thousands of others and meet our MPs to discuss the urgency of needing to act on the climate crisis. And one Operation Noah is part of a number of different Christian charities that are creating a faith pavilion, we're calling it, which is a rather grand name, but a sort of faith space where people of faith can come together, pray together, and also just be resourced and equipped before and after meetings with MPs. We're producing a Christian focused briefing paper, which includes some prayers and sort of reflections on how to go about the meeting, as well as some key points about how, as Christians, we can respond, but also as churches that we can sort of discuss with MPs from a Christian standpoint. So that will be available on the day, but also through our website as well. But there are a few different actions I wanted to just point out that you might want to talk about with your MPs if you are engaging with the mass lobby. And the first is around signing up to the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. Now, this might be something that you've heard of before because it's been around for a number of years, but this is a proposed treaty to push for the negotiation of a sort of binding international agreement to move away from fossil fuels that has a focus on equity across all countries. So some countries have not a couple of countries having to hold the burden and carry the load, but to fairly spread that across all those countries that have the means to, and to go much further than we've managed to through the United Nations process, which just seems so stilted and slow. And the Church of Scotland, I heard that somebody here is from the Church of Scotland. I think they were the latest church denomination to sign up to the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty at the Church of Scotland General Assembly last month, which is brilliant to see more and more churches coming on and signing up as people of faith to push for this. But it's also something that we can ask our MPs to sign up to and also support, because a number of MPs, particularly Labour MPs, did sign up to this when they were in opposition. And now that they're perhaps in positions of responsibility, have ministerial roles, they're starting to sort of go a bit quieter on it and say, oh, actually, I don't know about this, even if they're, a couple of years ago, were all for it. So it's worth keeping the pressure up. A second opportunity is to speak to your MP about the Climate and Nature Bill, which is led by Zero Hour, which again has been going for a number of years. It used to be the Climate, Ecology and Environment Bill, the CEE, and now it's the CAN. So the acronyms are changing, but this is a UK focused bill asking for much stronger climate and nature targets. And that's definitely worth speaking to your MP about. There's lots of information on the Zero Hour website and briefings and everything else to bring you up to speed with that. But now is a key time to keep the pressure up and speak to your members of Parliament about advocating for that. And then actually, I've just realised, I think, that I've got myself a little bit muddled between those two, I'm afraid. I think I was talking about MPs signing up to the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty and then rolling back on it. I actually meant the CAN bill, sorry. That was the one where there were some MPs who signed up to it prior to being in government. And now that they're in power, that they are being a bit quieter on it. So I think that's the one that we need to keep the pressure up, because UK MPs seem to be fluctuating on that. So apologies if I got myself in a muddle there. And then the third thing I wanted to flag was the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, which is another opportunity to engage with sort of what's going on in UK politics at the moment. I think I was having a check this morning just to see where we're at with it. And it looks like the second reading is happening in the Lords today. So if you are friends with the bishop, then do have a chat with them or anybody else who sits in the House of Lords and engage on that. And that's a bill that is going through Parliament, and it is set to weaken environmental protections around house building and development. I think while we were in the EU, there were quite stringent rules around new developments and housing developments, and the need to ensure that there were very strong environmental protections in place. But now those have turned into a proposed voluntary report that house builders may need to submit, rather than anything that's as stringent as existed before. So it feels like a real weakening of protections. And so that's another campaign that a number of different charities are involved with. I know that the wildlife trusts have been quite active with that. But that's another thing to have a conversation with your MP about as well. I think we've hit 1:30, which means time up. So sorry if I feel like I've rushed through that a little bit. But there's, I think, chance now to hear from Alex, and then we're going to go into a time of questions. And there's a couple of questions I've popped on the screen here that it might be helpful to prompt discussion in your groups. But I'll stop sharing my screen and hand over to.
Thanks so much, Claire. I don't think that felt rushed at all. You said lots of things that would be really helpful for folks to hear.